So I want to take some time and talk about this idea of making our presentation sheets and really on the basis of a technological discussion, the technologies we use, not that it's complicated. And because a lot of what this is not about the creativity, but it's the tools and technology. That's kind of really what this course is all about. Your perfecting of a presentation sheet is really kind of the activities of what will happen in your studio work and other kind of coursework you're doing. But I think it's important to have a bit of discussion about this idea of how the technology fits to ideas like the workflow and the way we do things. One of the ideas that comes up is we start out with this idea of sketching and working in hand, and we have to make at some point this transition, from going from a sketch to a digital model. And I'd really like to have a little bit of a dialogue about that. How is that complicated? Does the idea of drawing something and then not being able to translate it to a model, is that an impediment? Would it be better we didn't have to make the transition to technology, or does it empower us? And I think that kind of informs me for kind of the materials that we teach and the tools that we learn. But I can see where that would be a really complicated point. I think we're all familiar with this idea of doing these kind of, as illustrated here, this pin-up of our sketches and our original concepts. And we all know that eventually that works into a more formal presentation, where graphics and technology are really important in creating this kind of polished final look. And this is an example of what's happening pretty much currently right now in Thesis. This is the Thesis Prep. This is typical 6-7 boards that a student would put up describing their whole project. I think this has some good aspects to it and some negative aspects, or some problematic aspects, should I say, that I'll try to kind of discuss in the next few slides that we're going to present. But anyway, we need the tools to be able to do this. We need the tools to be able to illustrate. We need the tools to be able to type in the typography, the color, the graphics, and all of it together. And one of the things I hope that we get out of this course, because it's a very heavy BIM-centric kind of modeling course, is that we can use our tool Revit, which is our go-to BIM modeler for this course, to create these kind of nice graphics. And I use this as an example, kind of moving from this presentation sheet. This is the standard 24 by 60 presentation sheet. And actually in advanced structures, I had us build these modular systems to create a wood frame modular mixed-use development. And I asked the students to lay the sheet out in that 24 by 60 inch layout, and all using Revit. And you're relatively familiar now. I think most of us have already done enough of the modules to realize we could use our tool to really create almost these complete layout pages. And the reason for that, the reason I push it a lot, is this concept of workflow. How many times you have to go back to another piece of software when you need to make adjustments. And the idea here, I'll spend another minute here. If we were to change one of the given modules in this, and we know if we change one item, it'll automatically repopulate that item in all of the views. So we make a change in one place, and all the changes get made in the other one. So in fact, if you were to make a late stage change in your model here, your presentation sheet would basically be laid out. And we're really not quite there yet. That's kind of the way I hope things would go in the more perfect future. But we already know we're having problems with Revit being a great rendering. It's problematic with its ability to do its own rendering even. So we still have a lot of things to iron out with that. We're going to spend time creating presentation graphics. If you haven't done this, will be this is one of the next projects, or you may have already completed this one. And so we have this idea, that same, one page layout, one building, represented in many different ways. A tool you're going to use a lot, or be asked to use a lot, is Adobe Illustrator. You can import your images onto other sheet sizes there, and then make layouts. I wanted to talk about, I want to specifically point out that we don't spend any time in this course educating you on Illustrator. I'm hoping you get a little bit of preparation in your studio work. I also we all know just as easily as we could learn Revit by going online to YouTube, we can do the same thing with Illustrator. So it's a relatively complicated tool to master. It's pretty easy to get started with. And one of the things I always bring up with students, one of the problems is it's not free. You have to pay for it. I think it's something $15 or $17 a month. If that creates a financial hardship for anyone, I just wanted to point out that there is an alternative. It's called Inkscape. It's a free alternative. I have no experience with it, but I did want to search to make sure that we didn't have to, I guess, be dependent on purchasing extra software. Our Revit is free. It's a shame that our layout tool isn't also free. Another tool you'll want to become familiar with is Adobe Photoshop. And we're looking at the kind of manipulations that you might do with Photoshop. You could imagine the image on the right here being something that came right out of our BIM modeler. And we wanted to make it more realistic and do some enhancements to it. And that might include placing other objects, two-dimensional objects, three-dimensional objects into the scene. Photoshop is not a three-dimensional program. It's a bitmapped, rasterized image. It's flat. It's just like a photograph. So it's more like cut and paste of other items. And so there are issues with what we'll go into about this idea of workflow that I've talked about. And Photoshop costs money also, but it's part of that Adobe suite. So if you're buying Illustrator, you'll get Adobe Photoshop with it too. They are really worthwhile using. They are learning. They are requirements by many architectural firms that you have some experience with using Photoshop and or mostly Photoshop, and sometimes Illustrator is mentioned as being another important piece of software. But Photoshop is typically the one that firms mention. A lot of it has to do with retouching graphics, photograph or renderings of architecture. And there's a free version of that if you don't want to purchase Photoshop. It's called GIMP. I think this is hyperlinked. Let me click on it. Nope, it took us to a different slide. It may be hyperlinked, but you can actually just Google it. It looks very much like Photoshop and functions very much like it. So you really could use this quite effectively as a replacement to Photoshop. Now I want to spend a few minutes and talk about this idea of workflow. I think this is really critical. I think this is going to be more important in the future. You're kind of understanding about why BIM is so important and why staying in that building and information modeling environment as long as possible is really important to productivity. So if we look at this idea right now, this is like the current way that we might do studio work. We design something inside of Revit, and we render it, and we create these images, maybe 3 images. We do some post-processing. We change some colors, tones, add some objects to it in Photoshop. We bring it all together in a sheet in Adobe Illustrator, the page layout tool that I had just mentioned, and we end up with a presentation sheet. The problem is that if we have to make any change to one of our images, let's say, or to our model, let's say we have to add another window or take something out as a result of a critique or something, the revision process means we have to go all the way back to our BIM model. We have to recreate those images. We have to reprocess them in Photoshop, and we have to bring them back together in Illustrator. And some of us get really good at doing that, so it happens pretty quickly. But as I mentioned in a previous lecture, that 22 hours we spend every week kind of working through our projects, a lot of that time is in this kind of a workflow. And the idealized workflow, obviously, would be to be able to design in the software and have it create our presentation sheets. And we're kind of doing that right away in class now. And it will be very obvious that once you get to Studio, a lot of those concepts are going to be lost because we're going to be bringing other content in. And the pressure in Studio is to create these things inside of Illustrator or another layout software. But I want you to keep it in mind because technology is going to change. The future of the way we do this is going to change. And you're going to be sensing this idea of this bottleneck or this extra workflow that happens. So here's this contrast between our idealized idea. So we have this BIM environment. We have process our images in other software. We load, we save files, we bring files together, we make a new presentation sheet, we make revisions, go back and do the process again. Imagine in an idealized world where we make one change to our image and our presentation sheets, just like our technical sheets are changed in our BIM modeler, our presentation sheets would be also. Imagine the time that might be saved. And really the only way to appreciate this is once you've really started doing studio work. So I'm really trying to evangelize this, make it part of your thinking so that when you get forward thinking in your projects, you may look at the idea of streamlining this, bringing your own ideas to bear to make this kind of idealized process more real. All right, I want to shift gears now, and we've talked about printing sheets out, and I want us to spend a few minutes and think about this idea of digital presentations. You remember back, I'm just going to really go back to, excuse me for doing this, but the idea of a full sheet up in front of a person, having all of the data for the whole presentation laid out. You can also see this as being, if this was a PowerPoint slide, right? This would be 5 slides, 5, 10, 15, 20. This would be 30 slides in a presentation. Imagine you're the viewer looking at this big poster up here. You see the whole project laid out, but it's really hard to focus on any one detail. The only way that you can do that is if the presenter points out a specific area and discusses it. But then it's very small in this very large field of information that's being presented to you. So let me fast forward now again back to where we were here. I should have put that slide in next to it again. This idea that we're moving into the world of digital presentations, where when we present our ideas, we control what the viewer sees. We do it one slide at a time, one perspective at a time. And it happens across the screen. And this is really a very small screen, obviously, to a small audience. And it's really kind of like the world of the transition, because we're probably sitting in a room where there's also drawings and other kinds of communication happening also. But I think it's important for us to get prepared for this idea of doing our presentations in this kind of digital one idea at a time across the screen, because COVID has taught us that we can't all be in the same place together at the same time. We can't for school, but in work, we also can't. We have many people, many projects we'll be working with where we may have many people participating at the same time, scattered throughout the world on projects. People in the same firm in different headquarters or locations. And the idea of being able to have a common place to meet is obviously today more than ever across a digital screen. And in order to prepare for that, we need to have some basic understandings about what that digital format is so we can best take advantage of it. So one of the first things I really want you to kind of commit to, your basic knowledge is this idea of an aspect ratio, the kind of basic dimensions of a digital screen, the one you look at on your laptop or your phone if you turn it sideways. And not all phones are the same size, but for sure all television screens and all digital monitors try to stay within these kind of ratios. These are standard, and you can expect most of the people that you present to have these same kind of what's called an aspect ratio. And they're based on this idea of, we have the green is high definition. This is your normal, large screen TV at normal resolution, HD. Obviously, that's actually quickly changing. In the 6 years that I've been teaching this course, it's now become much more commonplace to be looking at 4K televisions, which are really just a doubling of the screen width. And with that doubling is actually a quadrupling. So we go from 1920, we double that, that's 3840 pixels, all right, across the screen in width, 2160 pixels down. That gives us a 16 by 9 ratio. It could be 16 inches by 9 inches or 32 inches by 18 inches. It's just the idea that we keep that ratio the same, and that allows us, if we make our dimensions of our drawings or our presentation sheets with this, they'll fill up a total monitor. And the reason for filling up the monitor completely is to best advantage the artwork, the creation, the ideas that we're presenting to our clients or to our collaborators. It doesn't mean we'll always be looking at it on the screen that way, but it's really the best way to get the most bang for your buck, so to speak. So keep that in mind with this idea of aspect ratios. Once again, that idea of a more universal layout. So here's our sheet size. Imagine that's a sheet that we created, and it's relatively close to that 16 by 9 if it isn't identical. I'm not sure how we did that. this year, I think we standardized on a 36 by 24 because it happened to be an architectural D size, and that's somewhat close to this kind of 16 by 9 aspect ratio. But you can see the idea that it fills a total television monitor or a computer monitor. And then once again, if we make it that full resolution, our pixel count should be about 4,000 pixels wide. That will give us enough resolution to take over all the pixels on what would be a 4K monitor. So the illustration I have here is the smaller box is, actually that's not quite correct, it's a little bit bigger, but that would be what a monitor would look like on a desktop, and then this would be what a large screen TV might look like. But you can see this idea that they're keeping the same aspect ratio as they move up through the scale. And then the idea then is that all of these presentation screens and formats that we use really follow that. So if you look on the left here, we have somebody in an office making a presentation on a portable digital monitor. That 16 by 9 ratio holds. And it also holds when we go to projection size television screens. So here we are making a professional presentation in a theater. And once again, we have that 16 by 9 aspect ratio. And the reason we want that is because people are creating content to fit that aspect ratio. So there'd be no reason for us to not fit that same 16 by 9. Now, imagine, go fast forward a few years, you're doing studio presentations and you want to have people critique your projects. And we are in Alfred, New York, which I kind of got Google highlighting here with the little red dot. And we have the regional markets, the places where all of our architects live and work, Rochester and Buffalo. And we are in really quite a remote location. It's a 2-hour trip from Buffalo, an hour and a half from Rochester, I believe it is. So asking anyone to come and sit through our presentations can be really quite an ask, so to speak. That means they're spending 4 hours in the car, and it's a full day to come and see projects. And so imagine, though, that we're doing our presentations in a Zoom meeting or digitally across the screen. Imagine the amount of people that now are available to participate for an hour instead of what would be 5 hours between the commute and actual participation. So the idea of moving to a digital format, while it may not be part of the studio work that you're doing, you may want to consider nudging the whole group towards this kind of thinking. And I'm, once again, trying to evangelize this kind of idea, because once we get into the professional work world, this will be the normal way of doing business. We're going to present ideas to clients who may not be where we are, who may not have the time to travel to our offices. And so for all kinds of reasons, being familiar, comfortable, and being able to make powerful presentations in that digital format, I think, is critical to our success. And who knows where this whole technology of presentations is going. I just want to, this is just something really that kind of took over in the world of COVID. Trade shows were shut down, gatherings of people eliminated, and this is kind of a digital virtual recreation of an exhibit space. You can see all these monitors on the side. If this was a real piece of software, you could click on these and you could visit the vendors. You may be able to virtually sit down at a table that has a group of people that you've decided to bring together to have a discussion with, all happening virtually. Plenty of reasons why not being together is not a great thing, but when there are things that prevent us from gathering, whether it be just the logistics and the expense of travel, the time required for travel, this idea of virtualizing our experiences together can be looked at as a really rewarding way to still be able to work together. And I think COVID has brought on the idea that this is a much more valid way to think about our doing business and working with people. And so once again, more on that future of like academic presentations. During COVID, this is in 2020, the start of it. Best student projects in virtual end of the year exhibitions. I think this is hyperlinked, and it really goes into a really bunch of creative ideas about the way students were presenting information about their projects. Here we see, once again, a virtual recreation of a space in a room with information on it. A lot of these were done in gaming engines, stuff that I think is really quite exciting and interesting. I'm not really proposing that we do it. I'm just kind of trying to expand the boundaries of our thinking on this. So I'll break this clip now, and we'll go and talk a little bit about typography and color in the next one.